Groupthink and why it's so easy to just follow the crowd. You're watching Making Sense with Robbie. Let's get started. If you can remember the 2016 election, for months ahead of it, everyone was so convinced that Hillary Clinton would win the election, and we were told that she was going to win and that we didn't have to worry about Trump, that he had no chance of winning. Everyone just kind of believed this. Like, there was no doubt about it. Even like the stats people were like saying, yeah, this is certain going to happen, like 99% going to happen. And then when we all woke up the next day, we found out that Trump won, and it was a big surprise for a lot of people. This is kind of a type of groupthink where everyone just kind of like goes along with this idea, and anyone who thinks differently is kind of disregarded or is discouraged from voicing their opinion. In the election, that was like a big deal, is because everyone was so convinced that they knew what the outcome would be that there was no questions, there was no thinking about the alternative possibility. And this like alternative possibility that no one considered ended up being what happened. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a group of people in which the desire for harmony or conformity in the group results in an irrational or dysfunctional decision-making outcome. Cohesiveness, or the desire for cohesiveness in a group, may produce a tendency among its members to agree at all costs. This causes the group to minimize conflict and reach a consensus decision without critical evaluation. Basically what it means, or what happens, is that like people tend to like as a group agree on something without actually looking at the evidence, without actually being critical or thinking critically about what the evidence suggests or like what the possibilities are. It's pretty common for people to want to fit in. Like, no one really wants to rock the boat. We don't want to necessarily stand out. We don't want to be the one who gets picked on for having a different opinion. There's a saying where the nail that sticks out gets hammered. And so like we have this sort of tendency to think or believe that like if we stand up for what we believe in, and if it's different from what everyone else thinks, we might get in trouble for it. We might get punished. And so like there's this tendency for people to keep quiet. But there's also the other side of the tendency where there's this tendency to disregard the people who have a different opinion, or to create a sort of social pressure against having a different opinion. Like people who have a different idea from what most people think, like they're going to be disregarded, they're going to be viewed in this negative light. They might have to have really strong willpower to be able to stand up for what they believe in, even if they're right, because there's going to be all this pressure about fitting in and going against the grain. Despite the fact that we all want to fit in, disagreement is actually how we often come to better solutions. You find if one person just has like one opinion and they keep on expressing it and they never get challenged, they never get questioned, then they just keep on believing that and they don't have any reason to readjust or reevaluate their beliefs or their views. And like this happens a lot in groups, because you might just have like a few people in the group who are very vocal, who talk a lot, or who kind of dominate the conversation, and they kind of just push the direction of it. But like if there's one or two people who disagree, they might be afraid to voice their opinion because it seems like the rest of the group agrees. And so like those other opinions don't get expressed, but those other opinions help the group adjust. They help the group realize they might be making a mistake. Okay, maybe this assumption is incorrect. Let's readjust or let's reevaluate it, and then we can move forward. And so like when there's no pressure to like adjust opinions or to think, critically about things or think differently about them, then we're destined to make first thought ends up being the decision that's made, even if that's not the best decision. And a lot of times like we're often afraid to express our opinions in the group, especially if we feel like our opinions are different from the people around us. We also don't want to necessarily be seen as the person who thinks that they're right. And even on top of this, sometimes like we might be worried that if our opinions are different, we might hurt someone's feelings. And this is especially a problem these days with the way that our culture is kind of framing arguments and ways of thinking about things. And so like a lot of times like we can't even talk about issues, we can't even talk rationally about things because like there's this fear of hurting someone's feelings or like offending someone. And so we can't talk clearly, we can't talk rationally, we can't like actually talk things out. And we talked about this in a previous video about the Dontkruger Effect, where people might overestimate their understanding of things. And so like because you have a group of people who are agreeing with something, they might overestimate their confidence. They might over-evaluate their ability to make sense of a topic or to be having sort of accurate judgments on it. And so that has the risk of making the group feel overly confident or thinking that they're more sure than they are. And that also kind of creates a little bit of extra pressure for that person who has questions, who doubts maybe what's going on or who has a different opinion, because they're going to think, well, if I have this different opinion, like maybe I just don't actually know. And or the person who knows a lot about the topic is open to the possibility that maybe there's something that they don't know. And so they might be a little bit less confident about kind of challenging the group thinking. And with anything, right, the more force it has, the more pressure it has, the more people who are behind it, like the harder and harder it becomes to question it, to doubt it. But like on top of this too, there's kind of like a bandwagon effect, right? And so like when you're in a group, once sort of one or two people are behind an idea, then it gets a lot easier to get behind that idea. And it makes it harder and harder for that person who's sort of on the outside or the outlier person to like kind kind of question, throw doubt at the group and say, well, you know what, maybe all of you are wrong and maybe there's like some different opinion. And I think too, like if you just say or you suggest that other people are wrong, like that's going to make it difficult. That's going to create conflict, and that's going to cause problems when it comes to like kind of resolving things or like thinking about things in a more complex way. But like groupthink really is just about like how everyone thinks the same. And or you have like a group of people who are the insiders, the majority of the group, they think one way, and then you have these outsiders who are a smaller group and they have a different opinion. Another thing too is like when something really big is happening, like when a big event is happening, we might like kind of turn off our thinking and kind of rely on the experts or rely on some sort of person who's been designated the decision maker. And so like when it's easy to go along, when it's easy to just follow suit as of everyone else, then that's like what we're more likely to do. You might find too, like in an organization, you have like yes men or yes people who basically they might find themselves in a position where they can see like a positive trajectory for them. And so they don't want to challenge the status quo. They don't want to change things. They want things to keep on going because if the status quo is maintained, then this is going to be beneficial for them. And so for a lot of people, there's like a disincentive against challenging or questioning things because like if your career depends on you believing something, it becomes harder and harder to ask questions. It becomes harder and harder to go against the group because the group kind of is protecting your job. But if you challenge things, then like you have so many risks. There's so many problems. There's so many disadvantages to saying something different from what everyone else believes. And like the most important thing to think about this is that good for there to be peace and harmony in a group, but that comes at the expense of like innovation. That comes at the expense of finding the truth. We need people who are willing to challenge sort of the groupthink, who are willing to challenge the majority thinking of things, because those are the people who force everyone to sort of reevaluate what they're thinking, to like look at the evidence and readjust. You can't create innovations. You can't move forward. You can't come to the best answer if everyone is fixated on the first thing that comes up or like what most people believe, because like a lot of times most people are wrong about things, not because they're just wrong, but because they don't know about this alternative perspective. They don't know that there's a different way of looking at it. And so like if they only know a small amount of things, then they'll think that's the right way. And so they kind of get stuck in thinking about like this sort of majority position that everyone holds, and then they won't sort of realize that there's this other way of thinking of things. There's this other way of looking at it that might be a better way of looking at it, because if you don't know, then you don't know. And so we kind of go along with what we hear first, what we hear the most strongly. But like the whole thing is that like groupthink is good at maintaining the status quo, but like if we want to change, if we want to improve, then we need to have people who are willing to stand up and say an opinion that's different from everyone else. And we need to like encourage that, but we also need to realize that there's going to be a lot of pressure on those people. And so we need to somehow figure out how we can encourage it and how we can enable it and how we can help it happen. And so my question to you is like, do you think that the world is sort of dominated by groupthink these days? Certainly seems that way to me. Let me know in the comments below. If you found this informative or entertaining, then click that like button because I'd really appreciate it. If you are curious about learning how to think about things, but you don't want to be told what to think about them, then click that subscribe button because that's what I'm here for. You've been watching Making Sense with Robbie. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk next time. Goodbye.